Welcome back to the Truth About Utilization Management, what every nurse needs to know, presented by Healthcare Nurses Network and Nurses Link Up. We've covered the fundamentals, documentation, and collaboration. Now, in Episode 4, we tackle a critical process that directly impacts patient flow, readmissions, and overall utilization management success: discharge planning. Is your unit caught in the revolving door of preventable readmissions? Is discharge planning often a last-minute scramble, leaving patients and families unprepared? As Dr. Nicolas Abella outlines in his fourth article, traditional, reactive discharge planning often fails, leading to poor outcomes and increased workload for nurses. But there's a better way. Get ready, because James and Emily are about to discuss Dr. Abella's approach to proactive discharge planning, treating it as a continuous process starting on day one. They'll explore the mindset shift needed and introduce a practical checklist designed to streamline patient flow and ensure safer transitions home. Here are your hosts, James Carter and Emily Ramirez.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast. We're diving deep today into something super important for giving our patients the best care and getting them great results.
You got it.
Discharge planning.
And we're going way beyond the basics here.
Yes.
Really digging deep to find those strategies that can turn discharge planning from just another task into a real tool for our patients' success.
Okay, so first things first.
Sure.
Why is discharge planning such a big deal? We obviously want our patients to go home safely, but what's the catch?
Exactly. The problem is the traditional way of doing discharge planning, it often just focuses on that moment the patient leaves the hospital. What we need is a bigger picture approach. One that sees discharge as a turning point in the patient's care, not the end of the story.
I like that. So how do we actually make that shift from goodbye at the door to get ready for what's next?
It starts with understanding that good discharge planning begins the second a patient is admitted.
Yeah.
Or even before that for procedures we plan in advance. We have to think ahead, anticipate those potential challenges, and prepare for a smooth transition back home.
So instead of rushing around at the last minute, we're making discharge planning part of everything we do for the patient from the very beginning.
Yes, exactly.
That sounds like it could really change things.
It really can. And one of the best tools we have is Dr. Nicolas Abella's discharge planning checklist.
Oh, I've heard about this checklist.
Yeah. It's not just a to-do list.
Okay.
It's a step-by-step guide that takes us through the whole process.
Right.
From admitting the patient to following up after they go home.
That's really helpful.
Oh.
So what are some of the things that make this checklist so effective?
Well, one thing that makes Dr. Abella's checklist stand out is its focus on gathering all the important information from the start.
What kind of information are we talking about?
Everything. We're talking about the patient's home life, their support system, how they can handle daily activities, any other health conditions they have, and even those social factors that can impact their health.
Hold on, social determinants of health. I'm not sure everyone's familiar with that term.
Right. It's a really important idea. These are things in a person's life. Things like having transportation, a safe place to live, being able to afford food, and having a good support network. All these things can make a huge difference in how a patient recovers after they leave the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah.
I never thought about it like that. But it makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're not just asking about medications and allergies. We're trying to understand the patient's whole life situation.
Precisely. Because that information is crucial for creating a discharge plan that really meets their specific needs.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Imagine a patient who lives alone and has trouble getting around. Getting groceries and cooking could be a major challenge for them.
Right.
We need to spot these potential problems early and connect them with resources like meal delivery or a home health aide.
That's a great point. It shows how important personalized care is.
Yeah.
And I imagine getting all this information takes some serious teamwork, right?
Absolutely. Discharge planning isn't a one-person job.
Right.
Nurses, doctors, case managers, social workers, therapists, pharmacists.
Everyone.
We all need to work together to create a solid plan.
I agree.
That's where those interdisciplinary rounds are so valuable.
Yes.
We're sharing what we see and what we know to make sure nothing important gets missed.
So we're breaking down those walls between departments and talking constantly.
Yes.
To keep everyone on the same page.
Exactly.
I can imagine that level of collaboration can be difficult in a busy hospital.
It can be, but the benefits are undeniable.
How so?
When we all work together effectively, we prevent mistakes. avoid patients having to come back to the hospital, and ultimately we give them much better care.
And I bet it reduces stress for everyone involved, too.
Definitely.
When you have that seamless communication and everyone understands the plan, it makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
You know, while we're on the topic of resources and support, I want to remind everyone listening that healthcarenurses.net is your one-stop shop for all things nursing.
That's right. We have a ton of free tools and guides.
Yeah.
Including lots of information on discharge planning to help you take your skills to the next level.
The great resource.
Okay, so we know that planning ahead and working together are key.
Yes.
But what happens once we've gathered all that information and made a personalized discharge plan? How do we make sure the patient and their family are really on board and ready to handle things at home?
Well, that's where communication comes in. And,
Sure.
I mean, really clear, simple communication.
Okay.
We need to explain everything to the patient and their family in plain language.
Right.
Make sure they understand their medications, their follow-up appointments, and any special instructions they need to follow at home.
It seems so basic, but I know from experience that communication breakdowns happen all the time.
Oh, they do?
Especially when we're dealing with complex medical information.
Right.
And families who are already feeling stressed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why Dr. Abella's checklist stresses the importance of using the teach-back method.
Can you explain that a bit more? Sure. It's where we explain something to the patient, and then we ask them to explain it back to us in their own words.
Okay.
This way we can be sure they really understand, and we can clarify anything that's still confusing.
Teach-back is such a useful tool.
It is.
I've seen it work so well in my own practice.
Me too.
It helps patients take charge of their own care and builds trust between us.
Absolutely.
But what about those times when a patient's family isn't prepared to give them the care they need at home? Maybe they're overwhelmed or they don't have the resources.
Right.
Or maybe there are just too many challenges to overcome.
Those situations can be really tough.
They can be. They can even be heartbreaking.
Yeah.
How do we handle those situations?
That's where that early communication with families comes in.
Okay.
By talking about those potential problems from the beginning, we can start looking at other options.
Like what?
Things like respite care or a short stay in a skilled nursing facility, if that's what's needed.
So it's about having those difficult conversations early on. Being honest with families about the potential challenges and working together to find solutions.
Exactly.
That takes a lot of courage and sensitivity.
It does. It's not always easy. But when we come to these conversations with empathy and a real desire to support the patient and their family, we can often find creative solutions that work for everyone.
And sometimes that might mean fighting for extra resources.
Yes.
Or connecting families with support programs in the community.
Absolutely.
It's about going above and beyond to make sure our patients have the best chance of success once they leave the hospital.
Precisely. And that brings us to another really important part of discharge planning.
And that is?
Following up. We can't just send our patients home and hope for the best.
Right.
We need to make sure they have the support they need to do well on their own.
So what does effective follow-up look like in practice?
It can take different forms. It might involve scheduling follow-up appointments with their doctor or specialists.
Okay.
Or connecting them with home health services if they need help with daily tasks. And it definitely means checking in with them regularly to address any new concerns or questions they might have.
Okay.
Even a simple phone call a day or two after they go home can make a big difference.
How so?
It shows them we care and that we're there for them even after they've left the hospital.
Those little things can go a long way
They really can.
in building trust and making sure our patients feel supported during their recovery.
Exactly.
It's about creating that sense of continuity and reassurance as they move from the hospital back to their normal lives.
Yes.
You know, it occurs to me that discharge planning requires nurses to wear so many hats. We're educators, advocates, problem solvers, and compassionate caregivers.
It's a lot.
It's a demanding role, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
It is. And it's a role that nurses are uniquely qualified for.
Because
We have the knowledge, the skills, and the compassion to guide our patients through this critical transition.
I agree. And speaking of resources and support, I want to remind everyone listening about healthcarenurses.net. It's a treasure trove of information on discharge planning,
It is.
including a free downloadable version of Dr. Abella's checklist.
It's a fantastic resource.
So if you're feeling inspired to level up your discharge planning game, head over to the website and check it out.
Definitely.
Now, as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to talk about something that I know is on a lot of nurses' minds.
Okay.
Time constraints. We're all busy. We're all juggling a million things.
I know.
And sometimes discharge planning can feel like just one more thing piled onto our already overflowing plates.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes crucial to change our perspective.
In what way?
Instead of seeing discharge planning as an extra chore, we need to think of it as an investment.
An investment, yeah.
Yes, an investment in our patient's well-being and in our own time and energy in the long run.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it.
Okay.
By taking the time to plan things carefully up front, we can actually save ourselves hours and headaches later on.
It's like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. By putting in a little extra effort, now we can avoid those frantic phone calls from confused patients.
Right.
Those trips back to the ER that could have been prevented. And ultimately, those readmissions that put a strain on everyone.
I see.
We're not just checking boxes. We're creating a smoother, more efficient system for both our patients and ourselves.
And we're reducing stress and burnout for nurses, which is huge.
Exactly.
So it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Right.
Using the tools and strategies we have to provide the best possible care.
Yes.
Was also taking care of ourselves.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Dr. Abella's checklist.
Okay.
It gives us a framework for efficient and effective discharge planning.
Nice.
It helps us prioritize tasks, streamline communication, and make sure we're not missing any critical details.
It's like having a co-pilot to guide us through the process.
Exactly.
But even with the best checklists, there will always be challenges, right?
You're right.
Real-life situations that test our skills and force us to think outside the box.
Absolutely.
What are some of the common pitfalls nurses might run into during discharge planning, even when they're following the checklist carefully?
You're right. No checklist can cover every situation.
Oh.
One common challenge is when the person who's supposed to be taking care of the patient at home isn't really ready for the job.
No.
Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed, or they lack resources, or maybe there are just a lot of logistical hurdles.
Right.
It can throw a wrench in even the best laid plans.
That's a tough situation. It's discouraging when you've put so much effort into preparing a patient and then you hit a wall with their support system. How do we navigate those situations using the checklist?
That emphasis the checklist puts on early and consistent communication is really key.
Okay.
We're not waiting until the last minute. We're having those important conversations throughout the patient's stay.
I see.
This gives everyone time to think things through, make plans, and even look for alternative solutions if needed.
So it's about proactively addressing concerns and exploring options like respite care or maybe even a short-term stay in a skilled nursing facility if the family just isn't able to provide the level of care needed.
Exactly. It's about being realistic about the patient's needs and the family's capabilities. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is acknowledge that a different setting might be better, at least for a while.
Right.
Until the family can adjust or get the resources they need.
And that takes courage from both the healthcare team and the family to have those honest and sometimes difficult conversations.
It does. Speaking of courage, another challenge I've seen is pushback from patients themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they don't want home health services, or they downplay their limitations, insisting they can handle everything on their own.
How do we approach that kind of resistance?
Again, clear and empathetic communication is so important. We need to listen to their concerns,
Okay.
validate their feelings, and explain why we're making these recommendations.
So we're not trying to control their lives. We're trying to empower them to recover safely and successfully.
Exactly. And sometimes a little gentle persuasion might be needed.
Like what?
We can share stories of other patients who benefited from home health support,
Okay.
or we can highlight the potential risks of pushing themselves too hard too soon.
So it's about finding that balance between respecting their choices and making sure they're safe.
Precisely. It sounds like discharge planning requires a delicate mix of clinical skill, communication skills, and emotional intelligence.
It does. No wonder it can be so challenging. But, you know, in the midst of all the challenges, there's something really inspiring about the potential of effective discharge planning.
Absolutely. When it's done well, it's not just about preventing readmissions, it's about setting our patients up to truly thrive.
Right.
To regain their independence, manage their health, and live their best lives outside the hospital.
And that's where our role as nurses becomes so powerful. We're not just giving medications or checking vital signs. We're guiding our patients towards a brighter future.
And in doing so, we're not just transforming their lives, we're transforming our own.
That's a great point. Discharge planning, when we embrace it as a crucial part of patient care, can be so rewarding, both professionally and personally.
It really can.
And for nurses who want to take their discharge planning skills to the next level, I highly recommend checking out healthcarenurses.net.
That's an amazing resource.
They have a wealth of information, tools, and inspiration, including a free downloadable version of Dr. Abella's checklist.
Definitely worth checking out.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into discharge planning, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine a healthcare system where proactive, patient-centered discharge planning is the norm, not the exception.
That's a great vision.
A system where patients feel empowered, families feel supported, and nurses feel equipped to guide them every step of the way.
I love that vision. And I believe that by following the principles we've talked about today,
Yes.
by using tools like Dr. Abella's checklist, and by always looking for ways to improve our practice, we can make that vision a reality.
It's a goal worth striving for.
Absolutely. No checklist can predict everything.
Right.
There will always be those real-life situations that put our skills to the test.
Right.
And make us think on our feet.
Exactly. So what are some of the things that can trip us up during the discharge process?
Okay.
Even when we're following the checklist to a T?
Well, one common roadblock is when the patient's main caregiver at home isn't quite ready to take on that responsibility.
I see.
Maybe they're overwhelmed, or they don't have the support they need, or maybe there are just too many logistical challenges. It can really throw a wrench into things.
It's tough when you've put so much work into getting the patient prepared, and then their support system isn't there.
Right. Yeah.
How can we use the checklist to help us navigate those situations?
The checklist really stresses the importance of communicating early and often.
Right.
So instead of waiting until the last minute, we're having those conversations with the family all along.
I see.
That gives everyone time to process, to make plans, and even to look for other solutions if they're needed.
So we're talking about proactively addressing those concerns.
Yeah.
And considering options like respite care,
Right.
or maybe even a short stay in a skilled nursing facility if the family really can't provide the level of care the patient needs.
Exactly. It's about being honest about the patient's needs and the family's capabilities.
Right.
And sometimes the best thing we can do is to acknowledge that a different setting might be the best option.
At least temporarily.
At least for a while, until the family can get adjusted or find the resources they need.
And that takes a lot of courage.
It does.
For both the healthcare team and the family.
Yes.
To be that honest and have those tough conversations.
It's not always easy. You know, another challenge we often face is resistance from the patients themselves.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely seen that.
Maybe they don't want home health services, or they downplay their limitations and insist they can manage everything on their own.
Right.
So how do we handle that kind of pushback?
It's tricky.
It is, but once again, clear and empathetic communication is so important.
Right.
We need to really listen to their concerns, acknowledge how they're feeling, and explain the reasons behind our recommendations.
So it's not about telling them what to do.
No.
It's about giving them the information they need to make informed decisions.
Exactly. We're on their side.
Right.
We're trying to empower them to recover safely and successfully.
And sometimes that takes a bit of gentle persuasion.
It does.
Right.
We can share stories about other patients who have done really well with home health support.
Yeah.
Or we can explain the risks of trying to do too much too soon.
Okay.
It's all about finding that balance.
Right.
Between respecting their autonomy and ensuring their safety.
It sounds like discharge planning requires a really unique set of skills.
It does.
Clinical expertise, communication skills, emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. It's a lot to juggle.
It is. No wonder it can feel so challenging.
But in the midst of all the challenges, there's something truly inspiring about what effective discharge planning can achieve.
I agree.
When we do it well, it's not just about keeping people from coming back to the hospital. It's about setting them up to thrive.
I like that.
To regain their independence, to manage their health, and to really live their best lives outside of the hospital.
And that's where we as nurses can have such a profound impact.
Exactly.
We're not just taking care of their immediate needs.
No.
We're helping them build a better future.
We are. And in doing that, we're not just changing their lives.
Right.
We're changing our own.
That's so true. Discharge planning, when we see it as a vital part of patient care, can bring us so much satisfaction.
Yes.
Both professionally and personally.
It really can.
And for any nurses listening who want to learn more about discharge planning and take their skills to the next level, I can't recommend healthcarenurses.net enough.
It's a wonderful resource.
They have a ton of information, tools, and inspiration waiting for you.
And don't forget that free downloadable version of Dr. Abella's checklist.
Definitely check it out. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive into discharge planning, I want to leave you with a final thought. Imagine a healthcare system where proactive, patient-centered discharge planning is the rule, not the exception.
I love that.
A system where patients feel empowered and families feel supported and nurses feel equipped to guide them every step of the way.
What a beautiful vision. And I truly believe that if we embrace the principles we've talked about today,
Yes.
if we use tools like Dr. Abella's checklist, and if we keep looking for ways to improve our practice, we can make that vision a reality.
It's a goal worth fighting for.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into discharge planning. We'll see you next time on the Healthcare Nurses Network podcast.